In this video, I'm going to show you how to mix in order to get the different elements in your mix to sit right in relation to each other. Getting the levels right is a crucial part of the mixing process, so make sure to watch the entire video so that you don't miss anything.
This is a Firewalk production.
In the previous video in this How to Mix series, I showed you how to gain stage in FL Studio. If you haven't seen that yet, then I recommend that you go watch it first and then come back to this one afterwards. You can find the link for it in the description below. If this is your first time here, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell notification icon to make sure you don't miss anything. Okay, now it's time to move on to the actual mixing and how to get the levels right for the various elements in our track. This is where it becomes somewhat more difficult. Mixing relies heavily on experience. It usually takes years of experience to get good at mixing. A mix will typically sound good on one system, but bad on another. It's almost an art in itself to get it to sound good overall on most systems. When you mix, the sound you hear will be heavily influenced by your room. This is why professional studios are always threaded with sound-absorbing materials, because the sound is going to reflect off every surface in your room, causing interference. You can of course use headphones to eliminate this problem, but headphones will introduce another problem on their own. If you want to learn more about this, then check out my Mixing and Mastering Explained video, where I talk more about these things. Fortunately, despite having a less than ideal monitoring environment, there's a few tricks that we can use to our advantage when it comes to getting the levels right. You should always rely on your ears, of course, but it's perfectly okay to use metering plugins to double check. After all, everyone perceives sound differently, and so you should always make visual checks to make sure everything is fine. It's also a good idea to constantly switch between monitors and headphones to double check. The kick is the most important element in modern dance music, so it makes sense to mix the track around the kick. The kick should be the loudest part of your mix. In the previous video about gain staging, I put together this simple project. It doesn't sound great, but it's a simple project with few elements, which makes it perfect for this illustration. Now remember, the synths are already gain staged, and all the levels have been reset in the mixer. In order for this to sound acceptable, some elements have to be quiet, while others have to be loud. So let's get started. I'll try to illustrate how you can go about mixing this to get the levels sounding right. I usually like to have the kick sitting at -8 decibels. That way I have plenty of headroom. Next, let's move on to the sub bass. A lot of beginners tend to mix their sub bass way too loud, even louder than the kick sometimes. There's a good reason why this mistake is almost unavoidable. The human ear is not very sensitive to low frequencies, so we tend to intuitively crank up the volume so that we can hear it. Another trap is the fact that the perceived energy of such low frequency sounds will vary greatly, depending on the volume of that sound. It's not a linear curve. On low volumes, your bass will typically sound too low. This is another reason why you need to double check with metering along the way. You need to be aware of these psychoacoustic effects when you mix. I'll use the span plugin again. I usually let my sub bass sit around 3 to 10 decibels lower than the kick. This will vary depending on the sound itself, so use your ears. If you want, you can click here to change the resolution. You can clearly see where the kick is and where the sub comes in. This looks okay for now. Next, let's mix in some high end. I'll add some percussion elements as well as some hi-hats. A good rule of thumb is to make sure that your hi-hat and kick sit at the same level. There will usually be some resonance frequencies causing spikes here, but in this project I have removed most of those with EQ. If you want to learn how to EQ, then check out my How to EQ tutorial, which is also part of this How to Mix series. You can find the link to that video as well in the description below. Now it looks pretty good. Using a conventional EQ, the graph should almost look like a valley, with the low end in one end and the high end on the other. There should be plenty of room in between. Note that in this example, the sounds have already been processed with EQ. This will make it easier to see, as more space will be created in the mid-range area. You should now aim to place your vocals, your leads, etc. in the middle of this valley, between the tops. That way you'll make sure that there's plenty of room for all elements in your mix, as I talked about in my Mixing and Mastering Explained tutorial. When your entire mix is done, it should look rather smooth like this, with no huge spikes anywhere. This can be controlled with compression and EQ, and I'll talk more about that one in the next tutorials in this series. Try to remember your kick should be the loudest part in your mix. It's good practice to set the kick at a certain level, and then move on to getting your sub bass sitting just right. When that's done, you can move on to the high end. Once this foundation is in place, you should leave these faders alone, and then mix in the rest of the elements around it. If you already have those levels right, it'll be much easier to get the other elements to sit right in the mix too. This will also help ensure that you don't end up doing the classic mistake where you keep pushing up the volumes more and more until everything becomes muddled and unclear. Make sure to check out the next part of this How to Mix series where I show you how to EQ in order to get a crisp and clear sounding mix. I'd also like to mention that I have now set up a few gigs on Fiverr. If you need professional mastering or feedback on your track, then you can head over there and check out my gigs. You can find the link in the description below. And as always, feel free to like, share, and comment on this video if you liked it. And if you really liked it, you can head over to my Patreon page and support my work there. I hope this was helpful. If there's any specific tutorial you'd like me to make, or if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.